Okay, well, we've got Loren Berg of Ciena with us now. Loren, perhaps you can talk us through this. I saw you downstairs in the last panel, and I have to say, this is where it gets complex, right? This is where it gets a bit difficult. So, if you could just explain through your paper here.
Okay. Well, the whole concept behind this, I think, came out of the wireless industry, mobile phones, where spectrum is allocated for different purposes. And undersea cables is basically that. It provides an optical spectrum that can be exploited in certain ways. Now, with what we've got today, with the amount of capacity we can provide on a single fiber pair, you know, for some customers that's more than they can consume. So the cable owners say, well, I can monetize this better, get a whole bunch of small customers, give them each a piece of spectrum, and charge them each a bit of money. But now you've got to kind of coordinate between different people putting...
Lots more work to do at that point, haven't you?
Yeah. There's different people putting light on, and they all have to play by certain rules because, you know, as much as we like to think this is all digital, it's a very analog system, fiber optics. And so you have to respect certain things if you're just using a portion of the spectrum. First of all, you can't be putting energy in other portions of the spectrum. You have to be confined to what you're using. Additionally, in submarine systems, they're typically power controlled. So if you're using too much of the power of the system, somebody else is going to be suffering. Okay. So traditionally, all of this has sort of been done on a gentleman's agreement, and it's been passively
carved up behind closed doors in smoke-filled rooms, right?
And agreed upon. But you know, 5 years go by, and what has been agreed upon, and there's no real hardware to prevent anybody misbehaving, right? Not that they do so intentionally, but mistakes are made, or confusion, communication, right? We're dealing with people. So one of the big problems is, you know, this guy has been allocated this portion of the spectrum, this guy has been allocated this portion of the spectrum. If they're all doing that, you know, everything works fine, very cheap, it's just passively combined. In the other direction, the same thing's happening at the other end, the full spectrum comes in. They both see full spectrum, and that's not quite right because I'm seeing what the other guy sent, and there's security issues around that, right? And then you've also got to make sure that they're playing by the rules. I'm only putting this much power in, I'm only in this part of the spectrum, and again, in gentleman's agreement. Well, you can add a bit of software and sort of say, okay, I'm going to talk to these two guys and make sure they're only putting the right amount of power in the right amount of spectrum, right? And I know if they're not. And so, okay, there's some control. What are you going to do if they're not? Maybe you can shut them off. I don't know. It's still a bit clunky. And you still got the problem in the receive direction that they can see each other's traffic.
Yeah. So again, that security issue rearing its head.
Yes, that's right. So what we're proposing, and you know, all the hardware exists, it's just a question of how we bundle the software together, is you've got a spectrum controller and input police, where this box here will only allow, according to policy, a particular portion of the spectrum from a particular vendor, and it will only allow a certain amount of power from that vendor, okay? And each of them have a particular amount of spectrum allocated and a particular power they have to abide by. Now, there is some flexibility if they start waning in power or increasing in power. You know, we can make small adjustments here to balance them out.
They get what they need if they've suddenly got an extra demand or requirement.
Right. Or if they, you know, if they outright fail and go dark, that's a very dangerous thing because submarine systems are power controlled. A portion of the power disappears from the system. It appears in other portions, which, you know, is an overlaunch, could be a bad condition. So this device will say, well, if you fail or if you're not playing by the rules, I can cut you out and put my own power management, local power management, surrogate wavelengths to just fill up that spectrum so that everyone else is kept whole, okay?
Is this the spectrum controller then that we
Yeah.
see talked about down here
Yeah,
in the bottom?
that's right. Yeah.
Okay, and what kind of equipment is that?
Well, this can be implemented in many ways. Right now, the hardware that we're using is a wavelength selective switch, and based on liquid crystal on silicon, or LCOS. And that the great features of that is you can carve arbitrary spectrum, have a wide dynamic range, 15 to 18 dB of attenuation, and so you can allocate spectrum with great granularity down.
Yeah, in a nutshell, you can actually chop it all up and to say, right, you're paying for this, you've ordered that.
Yeah,
that's what you're going to get.
Yeah, and it can change, right? It can change depending on demands. I need more spectrum. Okay, you can have more, right? Or I don't want to pay as much. I don't need this route as much. You scale it back, and it can all be policed. And then
is this what they call an open network?
It can be. It can be. I mean, one supplier could provide the controller aspect. It is very open because you have multi-vendors on it from that perspective. The other thing is this is a very centralized control, right? It's one person's or I guess the cable owner controlling everything. But who writes the software around that? Who enforces the policies, right? There's issues to work out there. One option is you got the person who supplies you this hardware writes the software and the policies and implements it all. Another option, and we're open to this, is we supply the hardware, we provide a north and southbound interface for it, and somebody else, maybe even the cable operator, writes the software and the policies for it. So, it's sort of at that point conceptually how we model it and the value provided to customer.
It's quite an organic approach, potentially.
Yeah. The key is all the hardware exists. Functionally, technically, it's not a challenge. It's how we do it and where it provides the most value.
Yeah, very, very interesting proposal. Many thanks for your detailed explanation, and yet a kind of a layman's explanation for us. But many thanks indeed.
Okay.